Hello everybody, welcome back to Ohio Has Issues. I'm Stephanie Haney, and no, I didn't kick Mike off the show, but I'm doing this one solo for us this week because he is occupied with this little thing we have going on called the Olympics. So he is out doing Olympic things, and I will take you through what we got for you today. And as promised last week, we're really diving into the redistricting amendment this week. So we'll be talking about that. We'll share with you more of Governor Mike DeWine's comments about the redistricting amendment and why he is not in support of it. We'll also share with you some conversation with Chris Davey. He is with the group Citizens Not Politicians. That's the group that is supporting the redistricting amendment. And we also talk with an Iowa election law expert, Derek Muller. You might be wondering, why are we doing that on a show called Ohio Has Issues? Well, Governor Mike DeWine made a lot of comments about the so-called Iowa plan, so we really kind of wanted to dig into that for you. Also, this week, there is a new Senate candidate entering the race in the hotly contested battle for the seat currently held by Senator Sherrod Brown. We'll be introducing you to that person, giving you the update on that. We've got a vice presidential candidate now for current Vice President Kamala Harris, who is running on the Democratic ticket, Tim Walz. We'll talk to you a little bit about that and check on if we'll see them in Ohio anytime soon. We'll let you know what JD Vance is up to as well as it relates to the vice presidential candidacy. But first, we have our Ohio Roundup for you. So this is where we give you a little bit of information about what's going on in the state of Ohio. Actually, I'm going to take this call. Speak of the devil, here's Mike right now. Mike, say hi to the people.
Hey, everybody. I'm still covering the Olympic madness in Berea, and I apologize that I can't be there with you talking about Ohio politics. But believe me, you're not missing anything.
Okay, thanks for calling to check in and say hi and make sure everybody knows that I didn't, in fact, run you out of town or kill you or anything. You're not on speakerphone anymore. Hold on. Oh, he hung up on me. Okay, great. Okay, so that was Mike. So I did not kill him. In fact, he is alive and well and doing that. Okay, now to our Ohio Roundup. Here's an update on the transgender healthcare and women's sports law here in Ohio. Now, this law was passed in January, but it was put on pause. There were court challenges to it. As of now, it will be able to go into effect. So what this law does, it bans transgender surgeries and hormone therapies for minors unless they were already receiving treatment. It also bans transgender athletes from taking part in girls' and women's sports. It was put on pause while it was challenged in court, but on Tuesday, a Franklin County judge said the law can actually go into effect. But the story is not yet over. The American Civil Liberties Union of Ohio said it will file an immediate appeal, of course. That was absolutely to be expected. So there will definitely be another round of seeing what's happening there. Okay, here's something that's new in Ohio this year. Non-citizen voter registration removals. This is something that the Secretary of State is doing for the very first time. This is tied to the Citizenship Voting Requirement Amendment, which passed in Ohio in November of 2022. So with that, the Secretary of State is now using BMV records to contact people who are registered to vote who have told the BMV that they are not U.S. citizens. So as a result of this, Secretary of State Frank LaRose told the County Board of Elections offices across the state of Ohio to remove 499 suspected non-citizen registrations. That was within the last week or so. And this is in addition to 136 people that were told at the County Board of Elections level to be removed from voter rolls back in May. So we're looking at 535 people impacted so far here in the state of Ohio. Now, the Secretary of State's office says that all of these people didn't respond to a notice asking them to either confirm their citizenship status or cancel their registration. And here's a quote from Secretary of State Frank LaRose. I want to give these folks the benefit of the doubt and say that most of them didn't intend to break the law. We want to make sure a mistaken registration doesn't become an illegal vote. We also want to make sure that lawfully registered citizens can participate seamlessly in the process, especially if their citizenship status changed recently. Now, if someone's registration was removed pursuant to this directive for suspected non-citizenship, that person will be able to cast a provisional ballot. Anyone whose registration is challenged can cast a provisional ballot, so know that. And then for these particular people, that ballot would then be counted when they prove their citizenship. Now here's an update that a lot of people have been very excited about, very high on, if you will. If Mike were here, he would say that was a terrible joke, Stephanie. But here we are. Recreational marijuana sales started in Ohio on Tuesday. So 98 dispensaries went live on Tuesday with recreational marijuana sales. There's a list of where you can buy your recreational adult use marijuana on WKYC.com. And we can tell you that the Division of Cannabis Control says more licenses are coming this week because they are trying to be as fair as possible with the rolling out of these licenses. All right, let's move now to your Veep Stakes update. Current Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic candidate, has chosen a running mate. It is Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and we can tell you that they don't have an Ohio stop released yet on their campaign tour. They were in Philadelphia on Tuesday, and then throughout the rest of this week, they'll be in Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada. Now, JD Vance has similar campaign stops. He is our current U.S. Senator for the state of Ohio and the vice presidential candidate on the Republican side. He was also in Philadelphia on Tuesday, also planning to be in Wisconsin and Michigan today, Wednesday, and North Carolina on Thursday. So a very similar path there. Now, we do want to share with you, as I mentioned, the Olympics is top of everybody's mind right now. Everybody's watching. The big topic today is the pole vault. We are rooting on Katie Moon, our Northeast Ohio native. JD Vance made a comment about Simone Biles. This was back in 2021. This was after Simone Biles withdrew from competition. She got the twisties, as it's called. That's when you lose spatial awareness when you're competing in gymnastics and doing something, flipping through the air like that. So she withdrew from the Tokyo Summer Games in 2021. And then JD Vance appeared on a Fox News show called Outnumbered. And here's what he said.
Did she let down the country, do you think?
Well, I think obviously it's understandable that she was going through an incredible amount of pressure. What I find so weird about this, and it reflects more on the media than it does on Simone Biles, is that we've tried to turn a very tragic moment, Simone Biles quitting the Olympic team, into this act of heroism. And I think it reflects pretty poorly on our sort of therapeutic society that we try to praise people not for moments of strength, not for moments of heroism, but for their weakest moments. And look, being an athlete is tough. Being an athlete at that level is incredibly tough. A normal response in this moment would be to say, it's just a shame that she's going through this. It's a shame that she quit. Mm-hmm. But instead, what our press has done, I think, is turn this into this weird therapeutic moment. Let's praise her for doing this. And I think that's really where the problem here lies.
I did reach out to JD Vance's vice presidential campaign, and they declined to comment, letting those words from JD Vance speak for themselves. All right, let's move on to the Senate race update here in the state of Ohio. And as I told you, there is a new candidate who will be on the ballot in November. This is because the Libertarian Party has now become officially recognized by the state. Now, this is the first time Ohio will have a recognized third party on the ballot in 4 years. Back in 2020, the Libertarians ran Joe Jorgensen for presidency. Joe got 1.1% of the vote here in Ohio. So the Senate candidate that they are fielding, his name is Don Kissick. He's a former auto worker from Ottawa. So we don't know a lot about him right now, but here's a photo of him. And this photo is from a while back. He is pictured here, cropped out of a photo where he was supporting Joe Jorgensen. So the Libertarian Party of Ohio Chair Dustin Nana said he actually hopes to have 15 to 20 candidates on the Ohio ballot in November, and Don Kissick will be one of them. So we've reached out. We hope to learn a little bit more about Don Kissick, but for now, here's what he looks like, and we will tell you more when we know. All right, here's your update on current Senator for Ohio, Sherrod Brown. We have learned that he is not planning to go to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. That's in a couple of weeks. Here's a quote from him said to CNN. "I often skip conventions. I'll go to conventions maybe a day sometimes. I don't plan to go." Now, Eliza Green, a campaign spokesperson for Brown's campaign, said, quote, "Sherrod is going to be traveling across the state, meeting with workers, and doing his job serving the people of Ohio." Now, Brown did say that he often skips conventions, but reporting from Cleveland.com shows that if he ends up not appearing at the DNC this time around in Chicago, it'll be the first time since he entered Congress in 1994 that he did not make an appearance at the DNC. He also told CNN that he doesn't plan to campaign with Vice President Kamala Harris. He says he's got his own schedule, quote, she's got her own schedule, I will focus on my race. Now, at this point, I think it's important to note a lot of people have said this is kind of a strategic move from Senator Brown. Being in a state that is trending toward red, a lot of people are saying that it wouldn't benefit him to tie himself to the Harris campaign, much like they said it would not benefit him to tie himself to the Biden campaign when that was happening. So this could be a strategic move. It could be just a scheduling issue. It could be that he's laser focused on his race. But in any case, won't be campaigning, apparently, with the current vice president and will not be at the DNC. All right, here's your update on Bernie Moreno. He is the Republican candidate for the Senate seat currently held by Sherrod Brown. Another previous lawsuit against him has come out. The lawsuit alleges that a man named Michael Falcone was promised a share in dealership profits before he was hired. He never got them, and that he was fired out of retaliation. So that lawsuit was filed in 2014, settled in 2016 out of court. The person who filed the lawsuit said that he couldn't talk about it because of the terms of the settlement. Moreno said the case was without merit, and he pointed out that the Plain dealer named his car dealership a top place to work in 2015. And if you're interested in learning more about this lawsuit, all of that is rolled up in friend of the show Andrew Tobias's report on Cleveland.com. We'll link that in the YouTube information in the show notes and in an article on WKYC.com. Now, Bernie Moreno has been very busy this week. He's been on a bus tour all around Ohio. He started on Monday in Chillicothe, and it's going through Saturday, where it'll wrap up in Toledo. He had a stop in Canton on Tuesday, in Medina on Wednesday, plans to be in Sandusky and Avon on Thursday, and Wilmington on Friday, before wrapping up, as I said, in Toledo on Saturday. There is a group of protesters who have been following him around. Again, friend of the show, Andrew Tobias, tweeted it from the more southern part of Ohio earlier this week, and we do know that they were present at least in Canton and also in Medina today. Some people protesting and calling to attention that they believe Bernie Moreno is, quote, someone who is a fat cat, basically, and is taking advantage of workers. That's what that's the message those protesters are sending. Now, if you want to try and catch Bernie Moreno on his bus tour, you can go to berniemoreno.com/bus-tour/. All right, that brings us to our main topic for Ohio Has Issues this week, the redistricting amendment. And Governor Mike DeWine made no secret of the fact that he does not support the proposed redistricting amendment that will be on the ballot in November. He made comments about it, specifically bringing up the issue of proportionality. And these comments were made on July 31st, so a week ago. So let's bring you those comments right now.
I'm talking today about redistricting and efforts to end gerrymandering in the state of Ohio. The voters passed our current redistricting constitutional provisions by a large vote with bipartisan support. Despite this, my personal experience with our current procedure is that it simply does not work very well. It needs to be changed. Now, there will be an amendment on this fall's ballot to change the Ohio Constitution in a way that its proponents say would eliminate gerrymandering in Ohio. It doesn't. Gerrymandering is generally understood to occur when politicians manipulate geographic borders and split cities, split counties, and even townships, all to maximize the elected seats for a particular political party. The New Oxford American Dictionary defines gerrymandering as, and I quote, changing the size and borders of an area for voting in order to give an unfair advantage to one party or group in an election. If this ballot proposal were to be adopted, Ohio would actually end up with a system that mandates, that compels map drawers to produce gerrymandered districts. In fact, Ohio would have gerrymandering in the extreme. Further, I'm afraid that if this amendment passes in a relatively short time, after the voters see the results, see the districts that have been produced, voters would once again demand change and would be even more disillusioned with the whole mess. we would have to start all over again, once again. Now, let me explain in more detail why I believe the current ballot proposal must be defeated. This constitutional ballot issue, if passed, would result in districts that surprise and disappoint the voters who live in those very districts. One of the reasons that voters will be unhappy with the maps that the amendment will produce is that the fall ballot proposal makes proportionality, it makes it king. Proportionality under this constitutional amendment must supersede everything else. And that's what the language says. Now, what exactly is proportionality? Proportionality means looking at past statewide partisan elections, figuring out what percentage each party got on the average, and then drawing each district so it favors one party or the other. So the total districts drawn in favor of each party matches that party's statewide average in previous elections. The amendment says that besides the obvious requirement that districts must be contiguous and comply with federal law, proportionality trumps every other criteria. Proportionality trumps every other consideration. And the language says that very, very clearly. In fact, the amendment says that application of any of the other criteria that's listed does not permit adoption of a redistricting plan that violates proportionality. Proportionality supersedes all. So, proportionality must be adhered to and is more important than and must supersede the following. We say that again. Proportionality must be adhered to and is more important than and must supersede the following. 1. Proportionality must supersede the importance of respecting county, village, city, and township lines. Number 2, proportionality must supersede the importance of keeping communities of interest together. 3, proportionality must supersede, and let me quote from the ballot amendment directly, and I quote, again, proportionality must supersede the equal functional ability of politically cohesive and geographically proximate racial, ethnic, and language minorities to participate in the political process and to elect candidates of choice. Again, proportionality must supersede that. And 4. This amendment says that proportionality must even supersede the requirement that, and I quote, districts for the same office shall be reasonably equal in total population. Proportionality supersedes even that. Now, the idea of proportionality sounds good. It sounds fair. However, we've seen how requiring the map drawer to draw districts, each of which favors one political party, with each district having a predetermined partisan advantage, and requiring a certain number of districts to favor each party, obliterates all other good government objectives. They all go away. Here is what such a state map might look like based on proportionality, based on what is in this constitutional amendment. Now, you'll see the map. Where did this map come from? Where did it come from? Well, when Dave's Redistricting, which is considered to be a nonpartisan objective website, was asked to choose the map that was the closest to proportionality in Ohio, this is the map that they chose. This was submitted by someone by the name of Kevin, and this is Kevin's map. Let's look at this map that comes closest to proportionality. And when you do it, you'll see some rather strange and I think unsettling things. District 60 in this map is reminiscent of the infamous, much maligned Snake by the Lake congressional district, but smaller. It connects Sandusky and Lorain, which traditionally have been in separate House districts. for the purpose of creating a district with a predetermined partisan outcome. Now, take a look at District 15 and 24 in western Cuyahoga County. District 15 is literally scooped out of District 24. Looks like it to me an ice cream cone. It needlessly splits parts of Bay Village. It splits parts of Rocky River, and it splits other communities in Cuyahoga County. The map does the exact same thing in eastern Cuyahoga County, where District 10 is scooped out of the district. The city of Cleveland is split. East Cleveland is split. Cleveland Heights is split. Shaker Heights is split. Mayfield Heights is split. Highland Heights is split. Richmond Heights is split. Euclid is split. Beechwood is split. Pepper Pike is split. That is 10 city splits in one district. Again, this is what proportionality does, if you adhere to it. Now, let's look at another map. This time from professional map drawers. Where did this map come from? It was the map proposed by the Democrats on the Ohio Redistricting Commission in January 2022, after the Ohio Supreme Court ordered a map that emphasized proportionality. Now let's look at this map. I will again note that this map uses the same snake by the lake method to connect Sandusky and Lorraine. In this map, the drawer used a similar strategy in southeast Ohio, where the proposed District 85 was drawn to connect the cities of Athens and Chillicothe. Now, one would think that a good government map drawer would 99 times out of 100 give Athens and Chillicothe their own districts. But this map drawer testified to the commission that he was forced to draw this district to achieve proportionality. So yes, you can draw a map where proportionality is mandated. You can do that. You can hit the numbers that proportionality demands. But in doing so, all the other things that we normally think that we want, that people associate with good government, go away. They all are knocked out. They're gone. Proportionality wins. You can draw that map. But everything else that we normally associate with good government is gone. Using proportionality as your guiding North Star means your map will divide communities of interest. They will tear up counties, tear up cities, tear up villages, and even school districts. Further, our citizens, when they see the strangeness of their own district, so once this passes, if it passes, and maps were drawn based upon this, our citizens, when they see the strangeness of their own district that they live in, will wonder how this ever took place, and they will become even more disillusioned with their own government. Proportionality is the ultimate in gerrymandering by manipulating each district. So each district favors one party or the other. Every voter will be in a partisan district. Every voter will be drawn for the specific reason of favoring one party, either drawn to favor Democrats or drawn to favor Republicans. This will also result in the disenfranchisement of many voters. Most elections will be predetermined, resulting in the election really occurring in the primary. Thus, if you are an independent voter under this constitutional amendment who can't vote in a primary, using proportionality to draw these districts will totally disenfranchise you. Further, this will result in those who run for office focusing mostly on the primary, maybe only on the primary, which in turn will cause Republicans to worry about a candidate on their right and the Democrats to worry about a candidate on their left, causing even more polarization in our state legislature. In conclusion, the proposal on the Ohio ballot this fall will make things much worse. This ballot proposal will lead to much greater gerrymandering and will soon have to be replaced once again. When voters see this, they will be outraged when they see the maps that amendment has produced. We need to end this writing and rewriting of our Constitution, and we must defeat this misguided ballot initiative. Now, after we defeat this inherently flawed proposal.
Now, when Governor DeWine made those comments last week, a person who is championing this redistricting amendment is former Ohio Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, who is also a Republican like Governor Mike DeWine, and was also the former Ohio Lieutenant Governor. So here is what Maureen O'Connor said, quote, "The disinformation from the governor today is insulting to everyone in Ohio and especially insulting to the 500,000 Ohioans, Republicans, Democrats, and independents who put the Citizens Not Politicians Amendment on the November ballot. Governor DeWine voted with his fellow politicians 7 times for unconstitutional maps and now says what Ohio really needs is what he calls the Iowa Plan, a system where the governor and other politicians get the final say on maps. For nearly a year, we have been publicly collecting signatures in all 88 counties, and now, 97 days before the election, he tells Ohioans that he and his friends in the legislature are already scheming to overturn what voters will pass in November. We're done listening to self-serving politicians tell us how they want to keep rigging the game. On to November. Since the governor demonstrated in his rambling and disjointed press conference today that he does not understand our amendment, I'm offering to sit down and meet with him to explain it." So in order to further explain to people what the Citizens Not Politicians group thinks of this amendment, how they intend for it to be seen by the viewers, how they intend for it to operate, we actually have Citizens Not Politicians Chris Davey with us today to help walk us through what they say the governor got wrong in his remarks. Here's that. All right, we have Chris Davey here with us from Citizens Not Politicians. Chris, thank you for being with us today.
Sure.
So last week, Governor Mike DeWine came out with a press conference and he said some things about the redistricting amendment. So we wanted to give your group an opportunity to respond, being a group behind this and really supporting the amendment making its way to the ballot in November. One of the things that he mentioned was he said that the redistricting amendment that will be on the ballot is an extreme form of gerrymandering. What do you have to say about that?
Well, the governor's a good guy. He's been a distinguished public servant for nearly a half century here in Ohio. He's horribly misinformed about the amendment. To take something that does away with gerrymandering and call it gerrymandering is almost Orwellian. The amendment will fix gerrymandering in Ohio by getting politicians like Governor DeWine, who is the chair of the current redistricting commission that has been found to gerrymander maps 7 times unconstitutionally, get folks like that out of the room and instead put citizens in charge of the process.
One of the things that he mentioned when he was speaking was a map that was submitted to a website, a map submitted by a person named Kevin. And he referenced a particular district that he referred to as the infamous snake by the lake and said, this is a possibility of what could happen when proportionality is taken into consideration. So 2-part question here to really kind of break this down. What is proportionality and how does it play into the redistricting amendment?
Well, those maps were a joke because the snake on the lake is something that was created with the current system. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we want to do away with. So this is a classic technique of disinformation, is to take a false premise and then on the basis of that premise, create an image to use to argue against. So those maps are total bunk. Nobody knows who this Kevin is, but they're all based on this false premise of what DeWine is calling proportionality. So what he's done is he is claiming falsely that the Citizens Not Politicians Amendment elevates what he calls party proportionality above all other considerations. That's false. the governor needs to read the amendment, because what the amendment does is it has a variety of conditions and criteria that the citizens will use for drawing these maps. And in fact, party proportionality is not at the top of the criteria list. First is for districts to be geographically contiguous. They must comply with the U.S. Constitution. They must comply with the U.S. Voting Rights Act. And then there are other criteria that come into play. But the point is, citizens will decide, not politicians. And this idea that party proportionality is king is what the governor said. Totally false. Read the amendment. You'll see that that's not the case. And so what he does is he takes that false premise, and then he has this anonymous Kevin draw fake maps and then says, look, this is what you need to vote against. The citizens of Ohio are smarter than that. They're not going to fall for this. And we're confident we're going to win in November.
Now, the website that he was referencing that this so-called Kevin person submitted this site to, that is supposed to create something that is perfectly proportional in terms of voter demographics in the state of Ohio by party identity only. Does that group have any affiliation with the Citizens Not Politicians Redistricting Amendment?
This group that this anonymous Kevin is associated with?
The website that was created, all of that.
No, it's all just a mirage. And you know, the governor himself has said repeatedly that the current system is broken and that politicians should not be drawing the maps. He said that for months and months and months. And all through that time, he and his fellow politicians have watched as citizens have mobilized, and we very publicly gathered signatures for nearly a year. More than 500,000 Ohioans from all 88 counties signed these petitions. And then less than 100 days before the election, the chair of the current redistricting commission, Governor DeWine, steps forward and says, no, you need to trust us, trust the politicians, vote against this amendment, and then next year we'll pass something even better. I mean, it's kind of laughable.
Now, I've been following this pretty closely, and I would have to imagine the average Ohioan might not be. But one thing that the governor did mention in his speech last week was a map from 2022 that was never a voting map, but that was submitted by Democrats. And I'm just trying to wrap my mind around the relevancy of that map. Does that mean anything to you, a map from 2022 that was submitted by Democrats on the redistricting committee that never became a voting map?
Well, the governor and his fellow politicians are pulling out all the stops to try and stop citizens from getting involved. And so there were hundreds of maps that were submitted. And in fact, there were lots of really good maps that Governor DeWine and his fellow politicians on the redistricting commission could have passed, but instead they chose 7 times to impose unconstitutionally gerrymandered maps on Ohio voters. And 7 times they ignored the Supreme Court, 7 times they ignored the will of Ohio voters. And now here we are less than 100 days before we're going to pass true gerrymandering reform, and he's digging out fake maps from Kevin, and he's pulling out maps, like one map from 2 years ago that he didn't like. It really smacks of desperation.
Now, I want to bring this back to the redistricting amendment specifically that'll be on the ballot in November. Can you remind us, please, how will the people be selected that will then eventually, if this passes, be responsible for the districts in the state of Ohio?
Yeah, this is a homegrown amendment that was drawn up by Ohioans for Ohio, and it's all spelled out in the amendment. We would encourage your viewers to go to citizensnotpoliticians.org where they can read it themselves. But to answer your question, there's a very specific process laid out where there will be 4 retired judges, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, who will be appointed by the current ballot board, which are all almost all elected officials. And then those 4 retired judges will follow a specific process to solicit candidates, citizens from around Ohio, and select 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 5 independents to serve on the commission. Now, we're going to get new maps for the 2026 election no matter what, because the current maps will expire. So there's going to be new maps in 2026 anyways. The commission will be impaneled to draw those maps, and then they'll go away. The commission will dissolve, and then in 2031, after the 2030 census, there will be a new commission of citizen commissioners that will be drawn up. They will draw new maps, and then we'll have those maps for 10 years. We won't have to keep litigating and coming back and drawing new maps. I mean, even Ohioans, some of your viewers who may not have followed it closely know that over the last couple of years, it's been a circus that's been led by the current politicians that run the Redistricting Commission. We're going to put an end to all that. We're going to have a very specific process in place, and we're going to do what's worked in other states. This is tailored for Ohio, but it's based on a concept that's worked very well in other states. Citizens commissions drawing maps. The citizens don't have a stake in the game other than to have fair maps and a transparent process, right? They just want a system that's going to work. Politicians want to keep themselves and their friends in power. And that's what we've seen. And by the way, that's Democrats, Republicans, both parties have gerrymandered in Ohio for decades. And the governor likes to point to the fact that the current maps were unanimously voted on. That's right. They're still gerrymandered. We're still one of the 10 most gerrymandered states in the country. And the politicians, Democrats and Republicans, conspired behind closed doors to draw up the current maps that we have. And what we end up with is he wants to talk about the snake on a lake, which doesn't even exist. Let's talk about the 6th congressional district, which spans 210 miles from rural Washington County all the way up to urban the Mahoning Valley in Youngstown. So we have, and by the way, the 6th congressional district was the subject of a federal lawsuit where Black voters in Ohio claimed that Governor DeWine and Senate President Matt Huffman on the commission violated their voting rights with the current map that we have in place. So we're going to fix this. And the way it's worked in other states is to put citizens in charge of drawing maps instead of politicians. That's the problem.
Okay, one final question for you before we go here, Chris. Former Supreme Court Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor, who also is a Republican and also a former lieutenant governor, she came out with a statement last week after the governor made his speech, and she invited him for a sit down because it was her belief, as you've also said, that the governor does not understand the amendment based on the things that he says. Do you happen to know if the governor has taken her up on that offer, or will the governor take her up on that offer?
Not yet, but we really hope that he will. The governor and Chief Justice O'Connor have had a good working relationship for many, many years. They know each other. They're both public servants. And she genuinely wants to sit down and help him understand the amendment because what he displayed at that press conference last week betrayed a really deep misunderstanding of what we're trying to do here. So we hope we have the opportunity to sit down and discuss it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chris. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Now, as Chris said, he's not aware yet if the governor has taken up former Chief O'Connor's invitation to speak. I did reach out to Governor DeWine's office today, didn't get a response on whether they would be taking her up on that offer. But in those comments, as Chief Justice O'Connor mentioned, Governor Mike DeWine mentioned the Iowa plan. So let's hear a little bit more about what he had to say about that now.
I believe that we must put an end to gerrymandering once and for all in Ohio. We must give the voters a system that they can trust and a system that they can have confidence in. The only way to do this is to take politics completely out of the drawing of maps. Let me say it again. The only way to do this is to take politics completely out of the drawing of the maps. Ohio should have a constitutional provision that instructs the map makers that they cannot consider past voting data that the map drawers know will lead to a predetermined partisan outcome. Ohio, as I said, must have a constitutional provision that instructs the map makers they cannot consider past voting data. Maps should be drawn based on population, with no consideration of past partisan voting patterns. And the maps should try to avoid the splitting of political subdivisions, our cities, our counties, our villages, and our townships. Why? Well, in Ohio, as we all know, services are delivered at the local level. We are a local government state. Services are delivered at the local, at the county, at the village, at the city, at the township level. And we should do everything we can to avoid, if possible, the splitting of these political subdivisions. It's important that they not be split unnecessarily. What I have just described is not a new concept. In fact, Iowa has been doing it this way for 4 decades, and they've been doing it with success. I believe Ohio should adopt the Iowa plan. I believe the Iowa system provides us with an example of a system that takes politics out of map drawing. Map drawers are, under the Iowa plan, prohibited. They are prohibited from looking at past voting patterns. The Iowa system is clean, it is simple, and has been used successfully to achieve the good government objectives that we all associate with true reform. This is how it works. Districts are required to be reasonably compact, and there is a very specific definition in there about compactness that's easy to understand. 2, under the Iowa plan, districts cannot be drawn to favor a political party. They cannot be drawn to favor an incumbent legislator. They cannot be drawn to favor a member of Congress. 3, under the Iowa plan, the map maker is prohibited from using the following. The map maker is prohibited from using the address of incumbent legislators or members of Congress. The map maker is prohibited from using the political affiliation of registered voters. Under the Iowa plan, the map maker is prohibited from using previous election results. Next, under the Iowa plan, the map maker is prohibited from using demographic information other than, of course, population head counts, except as required by the Constitution and the laws of the United States. The Iowa plan is simple, it is clear, and it takes politics out of the map drawing process forever. I will work with the General Assembly to introduce a resolution in the next session. We'll vet that proposal. There'll be hearings on it. We'll hear from citizens on all sides. And I hope then approve the resolution to place an initiative on the ballot for voters to approve the way the process should be. I will ask them to pass a version of the Iowa ballot language that's been in effect for this system for about 40 years now.
So those are Governor Mike DeWine's thoughts on the Iowa plan. So we figured we should dig into this Iowa plan, right? So we reached out to Derek Muller. Now, he is currently a law professor at the University of Notre Dame Law School. He was, however, a law professor at the University of Iowa Law School. He was there for 3 years, appears to be the foremost expert on Iowa election law. So let's bring Derek in now to kind of break down his explanation of the Iowa plan. All right, we are here with law professor Derek Muller. Derek, thanks for being with us today.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Now, you seem to pop up as the foremost expert in Iowa election law. So tell me a little bit about your background in the state of Iowa.
Sure. Well, right now I'm at the University of Notre Dame, but I lived in Iowa for 3 years. I was a law professor at the University of Iowa, the flagship institution there. And I was also there during the 2021 redistricting cycle and the census and all of that happened most recently.
And that's what we're talking about today, redistricting. It's a big topic in the state of Ohio. Governor Mike DeWine here in Ohio talked about the Iowa plan. So we want to talk to you about the Iowa plan. And before we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of that, I want to get just a sense of the state of affairs in Iowa. Can you talk to me about Iowa's voting demographics, both before the quote Iowa plan went into effect and then kind of after?
Yeah, I mean, so Iowa has had a kind of tradition of some Republicans and some Democrats, and the state has moved in different directions over the years. And there was a lot of, I think like in a lot of states, consternation over how redistricting would work in the 1960s and 1970s. There's a lot of turmoil as one person, one vote, and some of the Supreme Court's precedents came down about what redistricting would look like. There's kind of a compromise, an agreement that was reached in the 80s to develop this sort of Iowa plan, if you will. And it's been used in every redistricting cycle every 10 years. It's gone through sort of different approaches from each legislature looking at it about which plan they adopt, but it's moved pretty seamlessly ever since it was first fully implemented in the 80s, including into the present cycle.
Okay, and how would you describe Iowa? Ohio calls itself a swing state, but it's definitely trended more comfortably red over the past several years. So where does Iowa sit in that terminology?
Yeah, so Iowa, I think, has had a tradition of a lot of, strong Democrats from the state who have been governors or elected to Congress. It voted for Barack Obama in both 2008 and 2012, but there's also no question that it seems to have pushed hard to the right in recent years. Virtually all statewide offices are held by Republicans now. It is a pretty safely Republican state in presidential elections. All 4 congressional districts seats are currently held by Republicans. So it's experienced a pretty significant shift in the last decade.
Okay, and what is the Iowa plan? How are voting districts being drawn in the state of Iowa?
So the Iowa plan works like this. There are several things that state statute puts into place as this is what districts have to be. And there's a priority that we try to have districts as close to equal population as possible. We try to avoid dividing county lines where possible. When it comes to the state house districts, they're nested inside of state senate districts. So there's a handful of those sort of pretty clear guidelines put into the statute. And then it's left to the Legislative Services Agency, a nonpartisan working group within the legislature, to follow those rules, draw maps, and present them to the legislature. So it draws those maps consistent with those rules, gives them to the legislature. The legislature then has a choice. They vote them up, or they vote them down. If they vote them up and the governor signs it, becomes law. Vote them down, it goes back. And the Legislative Services Agency tries a second time to draw maps and sends it back to the legislature. Thumbs up or thumbs down. If they can't agree, it goes back a third time. And when it comes back that third time, if the legislature votes it down, they can amend it as they want to try to change the map and then send it on. But usually the Legislative Services Agency gets those first 3 chances. And in every redistricting cycle since the 1980s, the legislature has approved one of those 3 maps that's come out of the Legislative Services Agency.
Okay, so the legislature, though, effectively in the state of Iowa does have the final say on the districting maps. Is that correct?
That's right. So the legislature is the one that approves the maps. It ratifies them if it wants them coming from the Legislative Services Agency, or if it disapproves of all 3 of them and has the final say to adjust them or change them at the last stage of the process.
Okay, and is there any recourse? Say it would happen. I know it hasn't happened, but I don't know if you can tell me this. If it did happen that 3 maps were presented to the legislature did not approve of those maps, then passed its own amended maps, would the agency that create these maps or voters in Iowa have any recourse if they say we're not happy with those maps?
I mean, not particularly. I mean, there's opportunities to raise equal protection challenges if there's unequal numbers of people in the districts or whatever it might be. You can raise sort of ordinary challenges to how maps are drawn throughout the United States, but you could do that with the Legislative Services Agency map. There's really no difference, except that if the legislature does it, we think maybe they're more interested in interfering with some of those neutral choices. But otherwise, there's not really any particular recourse you would have if the legislature amends that final map.
And you actually had a unique experience in Iowa. You went inside a polling location. So I'm just curious, when you had that experience, first of all, I want to hear all about that. But secondly, at the voter level in Iowa, how do you think people feel about the way the voting districts are drawn? Do you hear anybody with concerns? Are people overall happy about it? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much I hear about it in the polling place. I work the polling places quite frequently, but people aren't often talking about the districts as much. They care that their precinct is in the same place. Sometimes they're surprised and the lines are drawn, but every 10 years, there are lines that are going to shift. And so some of that is inevitable. I will say I think there's some pride in Iowa about it. You will hear it referred to as the gold standard among legislators, people in Washington, D.C. who approach these issues. When Democrats in Congress were proposing some changes to how redistricting might work nationwide and proposing a bill in Congress, then the last Democrat from Iowa in Congress kind of got an exemption for Iowa, specifically in that bill. Didn't become law, but the thought was Iowa has kind of a special system. It should be treated as the gold standard. We respect that system. So it does become kind of a source of pride among Iowans.
Okay, I want to go back to your experience just for a moment in the
Sure.
locations. What was that like?
I mean, working as a poll worker, I've worked as a poll worker. I've also run a precinct multiple times. It's just a lot of work. It's showing up for the training weeks before the election to think about how the election systems work, how the polling system works, how the polling software works to check in voters. And then you show up at 6 a.m. with a team of people. They can range from teenagers who want to be civically involved to the elderly who are working their 50th election, who have the free day to be able to spend an entire day at the polling place. You open it up at 7 a.m. and you're just trying to process voters and make the process as smooth as possible. So for the most part, it's pretty seamless. Iowa has same-day voter registration, so that can create a little bit of complexity in trying to register voters at the same time they're trying to vote, make sure they have the proof of residency and all that. The University of Iowa, like Columbus or other places, is college town, so you get a lot of college students who are very mobile, and you're dealing with those situations. You occasionally run into voters who have difficulty with their voter ID, or it's expired, or they don't have the right proof and whatnot. So you're trying to help them navigate the process. It's a very quick day, though. You're spending 12, 13 hours with customer service, hardly a time for lunch usually, and then you close it down, try to balance all those books, hand them off to the sheriff's appointed representative to get it back to the county, and then turn all that equipment in. So it's a very full day, and I love doing it as a sort of a public service because I picked the precinct. I get to see some of my neighbors and some of the people from the local community. And it's kind of a thankless job for many people, but I think they appreciate the opportunity to sort of step in there and do their civic duty.
Sure, it takes a lot of people to make the wheels of democracy turn. Derek, I want to ask you one final question before we let you go. So here in Ohio, obviously, redistricting is a big conversation. A question that has come up because the governor just now has come forward saying that he would like to put something together in Ohio that's similar to the Iowa plan because the governor does not support the redistricting amendment that will be on the ballot here in Ohio. So I want to ask you about the origin of that reform for the Iowa plan back when it first went into effect. Do you know if that was a citizen initiated reform or if that was a legislative initiated reform when it was put into practice in Iowa?
Sure. So in the state of Iowa, there was some discussion in the 1970s about reforming this plan. The Iowa Supreme Court suggested, really instructed the legislature to develop a new plan for redistricting. So this was not one that came out of a citizen initiative. There's no sort of just citizen initiatives in the state of Iowa. While a lot of Western states have those, Iowa does not. It has to come from the legislature if you're going to amend the Constitution or amend the statutory code. So it was actually something that the legislature proposed. And so it's something that the legislature developed in the 1980s. And again, it's been an interesting process. While the legislature could keep this to itself, or while it could go to the third plan and amend it, it's never done so. It's always adopted one of those plans out of the Legislative Services Agency. The legislature kind of bought in to this proposal 50 years ago, and it's kind of stuck with the plan ever since.
Okay, and as it being a legislator initiated reform plan, it is possible that the legislature could change it. Is that right?
Yeah, the legislature could change the plan, change what those components in the plan look like. It could change it to there being, 5 proposals from the Legislative Services Agency, or it could change it down to 1, or it could sort of revoke it altogether. So there are opportunities for the legislature to move and change those things. Again, right now it has a lot of power. If it wants to, it always has that last check, right? It always has that opportunity to draw the map. It just hasn't done so because it's trusted the process. It's trusted the rules it puts in place, saying equal population, trying not to split counties, things like that. And it deferred to the legislative services agencies and its maps over the years.
Okay, Derek, a lot of talk about the Iowa plan here in Ohio. So thank you very much for breaking it down for us here on Ohio Has Issues.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Derek, for breaking that down for us. I will say he talked about the gold standard and how the Iowa plan is seen as the gold standard. One thing that he mentioned there that I do believe we can all agree on is a gold standard is same-day voter registration. I've long believed that we do make it too difficult to vote and it should be easier. What's wrong with same-day voter registration? Iowa has figured it out. We could do that here in Ohio, and then people would be able to cast those ballots and have their voice heard. So I am an advocate for same-day voter registration. I think that's something that we should figure out here in the state of Ohio. Another thing I want to point out from the conversation with Derek, a big takeaway that I saw there was there's a big difference between a state law and a state constitutional amendment. So the legislature can easily change the law. It's a little more difficult to change the state constitution. So what is being proposed in Ohio right now is a redistricting amendment. It would amend the state constitution. So that would be in place for a while, and it would be more difficult to change it, a lot more purposeful to change that. What Governor Mike DeWine is proposing is that the legislature acts in the future, a promise to work with the legislature, which, by the way, Ohio's legislature, this is just a fact, has been called the most ineffective legislature in the country because there's a lot of battling happening right now between the Republicans who are in power in the Ohio legislature. They haven't been able to get a lot of legislation passed. So he says that he would be able to do that, but we truly don't know what kind of compromise and what kind of working together would be able to happen in the Ohio General Assembly. So just something to think about there. Big difference between a state law and a constitutional amendment. That brings us to the end of the show for this week. Thanks for sticking with me through it all. Of course, we missed Mike terribly, but he will be back next week. Next week, we will be focusing on the Ohio Supreme Court because there are several Ohio Supreme Court seats open on the ballot this November. We'll talk about who's running, what's at stake, and Mike will give you his take on an Ohio Supreme Court ruling that boneless wings can have bones in them. If that doesn't get you coming back for more, I don't know what will. Thank you very much for being with me here for Ohio Has Issues this week. We'll see you back next week, everybody.